I'm thrilled that we can be joined tonight by Columbia College professor in the School of Visual Arts, Paul Catanese, to present his lecture, Spectral Imprints, Sentient, Pluralities, and Unhuman Art. Considering artistic co-creation with artificial intelligences purposefully intersecting with print and expanded media, Professor Catanese will be sharing artworks he has been recently developing, including during his engagement as a Fulbright Scholar at the Academy of Fine Arts in Wroclaw, Poland, during the spring and summer of 2024. We'll also see a selection of prior projects to provide a sense of context and trajectory for these new works. The presentation is sure to spark a conversation regarding processes, concepts, challenges, concerns, and observations that shape artistic creative practice in light of the shifting and ever-expanding terrain of artificial intelligences. Paul Catanese is a hybrid media artist whose diverse range of works include installation, performance, sound, video, and print media. His work has been exhibited at the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Chicago Cultural Center, and the New Museum of Contemporary Art, amongst others. Catanese is the author of Director's Third Dimension, a book on real-time 3D programming, and co-author of Post-Digital Printmaking, a book examining the rapid evolution of traditional printmaking to incorporate industrial tools such as laser cutters and computer-controlled routers. In 2014, he was awarded an Freemanson Contemporary Arts Fellowship, and named the Christian A. Johnson Endeavor Foundation Artist in Residence at Colgate University in 2018 and 19. Noteworthy collections featuring his work include the Robert and Elaine Stein Galleries at Wright State University, Center for Art and Environment Archives at the Nevada Museum of Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. Let's all welcome our esteemed guest, artist, educator, colleague, and friend, Paul Catanese.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks, everyone. Oh my goodness, it's so nice to be here on home turf. Oh, this is so exciting. We have so much to talk about today. And so I talk fast. I'm sorry. It is what it is. And when I'm excited, I'll talk a little faster, but we'll do this thing. So, it's like the mic's a little hot. So, yeah. So I have a lot of different things I want to cover today. And I want to try and take us on a journey together because I think there's some really interesting things brewing, and I've been trying to be involved in that. For me, one of the really coolest parts of these talks is the chance to really have a conversation with you all. So my goal is to try and give you enough different threads to kind of think about and chew on, that we can kind of dig into on some weird and unusual ideas. So some things I'll talk about fast and some things I'll talk about slow. I'm going to jump to this slide because we're going to chill out on this slide for a while. I've been doing a lot of chatting about my work for a long time. And I found that I got to this point where in a talk like this, sometimes you would rush to look at work. And then towards the end, it would be like, yeah, but what's on my mind? So I want to tell you about what the structure of the talk is to begin with. Just that way, you know the journey we're going on. So what I've come up with is an idea where we would hang out on one slide together, and I could tell you about some unresolved thoughts that are going through my head over the last year or so as I'm working on my process. I'm trying to reveal to you some of the things that are unresolved that are really motivating a lot of the works that I'm dealing with, because this way, look at that. This way, what could happen is as we then start to look at work, we'll look at some trajectory of past work, we can look at current work, you can get a sense, I hope, of how these things connect together. So first slide, we're going to hang out on for a while. Then we'll switch gears and we'll look at some past work. And then we'll switch gears again and we'll look at the most current work that, again, has some unresolved structure to it. So hopefully that sounds good. That's what we're going to try and do. Try and land the plane on time. We'll see how it goes. All right. So certainly, I know Heather talked about a little bit in her introduction. She's mentioned two things that I want to make a point of. The first thing she mentioned is that I do call myself hybrid media artist. This is, sometimes I just name these talks hybrid media artist, Paul Catanese. And part of the reason why I do that is because hybrid media artist is meant to be a question mark. It's meant to provoke you into saying, what the heck is that? What is that supposed to be? And so I would hope that part of this talk will give us a chance to dig in on what that might mean. I think my practice is about trying to figure out what I might mean about the things that I say in the first place. So that can be kind of a fun way to move forward. Anyway, I've also been working a great deal with artificial intelligence and machine learning for quite a while. And I've been working with art and technology for most of my career, which is, nearly 30 years of making stuff. And so I know maybe I'll throw the lead out there, but, I know for a lot of people, maybe they've been encountering artificial intelligence recently, perhaps over the last 3 years. It's worth knowing that this is a field that's 70 plus years old. There's been a lot of artists working with these types of technologies and different variants of it. And I think it's important to look at the broad scope of what's been out there and how things have been burbling. And I think that's kind of a neat thing. Okay, so let me get to this slide because I've been kind of ignoring it. Oh my God, but you're like looking at these words, you're like, what's he going to say? So first and foremost, I want to talk about this word called black box. Now remember, these are going to be 9 incomplete thoughts. So you're going to get what you get, and then we'll see how it goes. So black boxes. So I'm thinking about this in the context of artificial intelligence and engineering talk. I don't know if anybody's encountered this term before there, but black boxes are sometimes talked about by engineers as a type of way of compartmentalizing where, say, a process that you don't really want to have to explain happens. So for instance, artificial intelligence is sometimes summarized as being a type of black box where you might have a type of mechanism. You ask it a question, something magical, so to speak, happens inside of it, or something happens that you don't understand necessarily, and then an answer comes out of it. So this black box engineering metaphor oftentimes gets thrown around, and it's an interesting metaphor. It can be a useful metaphor. It certainly makes certain types of conversations happen faster or slower. And here's the thing is, as an artist, I'm oftentimes, and certainly I hope any of you who have played even a little bit with the most current artificial intelligence and machine learning products that we're being presented with, I hope that you might have a sense that this black box paradigm is something that we get presented with again and again and again in the context of technology encounters with culture and technology encounters with the world. So it's important, but at the same time, I have an odd background, and my background is visual arts, installation, but it's also in theater. So I also tend to think about the black box as coming from experimental theater world. And so, and in fact, when I was introduced to making installation art, it wasn't through the realm of how visual artists have come to adopt that space. It really comes through the space of theater and the conception of black box. And the black box is an experimental type of world where it's a completely empty black box and it's the void. It's chaos. It's very different than the gallery white cube world. It's where for me, it's a place where sort of, I wouldn't say reality, but where ideas kind of erupt from this chaos. So the idea, I'll try and get through the first point of the first slide of many slides. And just to say that for me, I've been thinking a lot about both being inside this black box of the theater space, as well as being outside of this engineering paradigm black box. And I find that a lot of my work with artificial intelligence tends to mean oscillating conceptually between these two spaces, and that there's sort of an engine of creation that happens when you oscillate between multiple things. Anyway, let's move on to the second point of the first slide of many slides. I swear we'll get there. Every slide is just points. So I want to talk a little bit about erasure. This one I'll be quicker with, just because I think it'll be easier to talk about. A lot of the artificial intelligences that exist right now in terms of the types of tools, again, I'm just using that as a placeholder until we know more, as a convenience sake, so I can say the sentence without wearing so much weight about what are we really even talking about when we talk about this thing that's being sold to us. In any case, a lot of the tools that are being sold as generative artificial intelligences at this point in time, they tend to really do a good job of filling all space, of taking up all air, of extracting all. They fill. That's really what they're kind of good at, actually. I mean, if I'm going to give them credit for something. And so I find that one thing that I'm really good at that they're not good at as an artist is erasing. I can erase everything they've done. And so I'm having a lot of fun with that. Third thing I want to talk about is plurals. And so in this sense, I think a really important point, and I think you notice it in the title of my talk where I said sentient pluralities and unhuman art. I think it's really crucial, at least I've been telling myself it's really crucial. You decide if it's crucial or not. I think it's really crucial to always try and talk about these artificial intelligence products that we're being presented with as in a plural sense. I would prefer to be thinking about them as artificial intelligences, because we're not talking about one thing. Even a single product called an artificial intelligence is actually an amalgamation of multiple machine learning systems that intersect, and that we have a smooth veneer put on them. And so I think it's really, really important to be in a position of command, so to speak, at least of our own thoughts. And one of the positions of command that we can put ourselves in is to understand that we're not just dealing with a single thing. We're not really dealing with an entity at all, but we're certainly not dealing with a single artificial intelligence. We're dealing with artificial intelligences. At least that's what I tell myself. So I think plurals have a big role to play. Seduction. Let's talk about this one. Yeah, we have to go somewhere. It's like, I think seduction's a really important thing to talk about. About maybe this is probably spring, summer of 2022, OpenAI reached out to me to invite me into one of their research betas, because I do a lot of nerdy stuff and make art out of it. And that's my jam. People tend to know me and want to do different things and give me access to different stuff, which is fine. It's not a big deal. It's like just part of how I work. And so I was getting access to things like a ChatGPT, or what that became, and things like DALL-E, an early version of DALL-E that you can't even access at this point. The version of DALL-E you get now is different than the version of DALL-E that they have then, because they're always constantly changing, which is interesting in itself. Anyway, the point I want to get at is that these tools have been designed to seduce you. And I think it's really, really interesting to think about the fact that they are, and another word that sometimes I think about is addictive. And I go back and forth between the two, but I think seductive, I mean, we're artists here, so we'll go with seductive. And I think it's important to think about the active practice of creating a seductive material that's meant to draw us in. I could probably apply that to like social media or other types of products that we've been presented with. This is in that same vein. And so I'm thinking a lot about what that seductive space is, and what does it mean as an artist to sometimes, frankly, roll with it, and sometimes step back and have a meta relationship to that type of seduction and realize my role and my place within it. I want to talk a little bit about finite space. We're up to 0.5. It's coming along. So I want to talk a little bit about finity, finite spaces. A lot of times, a lot of the artificial intelligence rhetoric deals with this idea of infinite ideas, and you can make an infinite number of images. This kind of talk gets thrown about easily and maybe lazily. And so I was thinking, actually, I'm really interested in finite and bounded spaces. One might want to think about how actually these are maybe impossibly large spaces. Maybe it's improbable that you would try and create much. But these finite spaces, I think a closed kind of space is maybe a better way of thinking about the access to the image universe, or the text universe, or the sound universe that you get access to with some of the generative tools the way that they are. They're trained on some finite number of things, and certainly they can create an enormous number, but I don't necessarily know that they can create an infinite number. And in fact, maybe a thing to think about was kind of draw our attention back to what I mentioned about the earliest versions of DALL-E doesn't really exist, or at least it's not really accessible at this moment in time, which means that in the first 2-3 months when I was seduced to create 10 or 20,000 images in a blink, if I can't create those images right now, then that actually represents a type of finite bounded data set that could only come out of one particular point in time. And so it's kind of interesting that you only really visit technology in these really, really short bursts. And so what I'm trying to say is your moment is super important. And so the moment that you're in, the idea that these aren't forever infinite tools that exist in some abstract space. They exist in our time, which is part of what gives us, I think, command and a power to be able to use them. Not like they are something that exists for forever, but because they're bounded and limited is where some of the interest kind of comes in for me. Okay, let's go to point 6, shall we? This one I'll spend only a drop of time on, but it's such a fancy thought. Ekphrasis is a word, but it also is an important word, I think. Let me explain. Ekphrasis is a type of poetry. It's actually an early form of poetry that deals with poetry that describes paintings. Yeah, so there's this early kind of form of poetry, and ekphratic thought is a really interesting one. I'm really interested in the ship that launched 1,000 PhDs. I'm waiting for all the art historians out there to run with this idea that we're in this really interesting moment where text and image and their relationship are becoming newly invigorated with a new type of set of relationships that didn't exist before. So I'm really, really kind of curious about the ekphrastic descriptive modalities of thinking about art and image and how those are ascendant in some way, and what that will mean even for people who do decide not to use artificial intelligences. It floods our world with a way of thinking about paradigms, about thinking about how images sit in relationship to text. And I think this is kind of a fascinating moment to be in when you have tools that are blurring our conception of what's possible in the relationship between texts. So ekphrastic thoughts on the rise and on my mind. Hey, we're on 0.7. We're doing great. Okay, so let me pick up the pace because I'm not speaking quite fast enough. Anyway, I'm sure I am. I'm not sure how many people here read a ton of theory. I'm just kind of curious, a show of hands. It's okay if you don't know this person. Has anybody here come across the theorist Karen Barad? Has that name mean anything to anyone? Oh, great. Oh, cool. Okay, so Karen Barad is a fantastic theorist, really close to my heart. She's written a book called Meeting the Universe Halfway. That's been a kind of a really important touchstone for me. One of her ideas is this thing called agential realism. And agential realism deals with a type of theory where, how do I describe this? It deals with the notion that everything is entirely entangled with one another. Karen Barad's fantastic. She has outlined, okay, first, let me back up. Karen Barad is a theoretical physicist who's also a feminist art theorist. And so her background, she's kind of in that interesting realm of science and technology studies, and her vision of a feminist refractive version of what reality is a really, really crucial way of thinking about how to construct our relationships to materials. And in fact, she's one of the leading protagonists in an area called new materialism. There's a few other people out there that are really large in it, but I looked at Karen Barad as, again, because of her theoretical physics background, and this book in particular, Meeting the Universe Halfway, it's really fascinating in that she spends a good portion of the book, about the first third to almost half of the book, leading us through an explanation of some of the things that were happening at the turn of the last century with regard to, and maybe you've heard of this whole like wave particle kind of jazz that was going on in theoretical physics, where they're trying to figure out if light is made of waves or if it's made of particles, this kind of stuff. She brings it back down to this notion that certain elements or certain like light, when it is observed, will act differently than if it's not observed. So this kind of thing. Anyway, I will spare you the whole entire book. It's totally worth it. But she bases what she talks about is there was this moment of there's this moment where you have essentially literally a gentleman's agreement to not look inside the black box that is theoretical physics, and to say, actually, for her, at least this is my own paraphrase, instead of thinking about that, not looking in the black box, she squarely looks at it and kind of notices that maybe subject and object like don't hold up. Maybe that's part of the thing. And so then she rebuilds a whole theory of art and science and living practice based on this notion that maybe what we discovered then wasn't so much this wave particle duality thing, but maybe what we discovered that was subject and object needed to float away in the first place, which I find fascinating. Anyway, it's a really good book. I don't want to summarize it. I'll just say that this agential realism idea, this idea of there being everything entangled with one another, and then reality-ish is this moment that cuts across, that there's these divisions, that's our moment, feels really, really relevant to what happens when we start to think about our relationship to something that's being called artificial intelligence, which is, in its sense, actually machine learning techniques that are the latest version of a whole long line of different things that have been called artificial intelligence over the past 70 years. Let's get to hyperobjects. I'm not sure if you know Timothy Morton. If you don't know Timothy Morton, another really fantastic thinker, super interesting in the context of ecological thought. The particular book and the thinking that I want to bring up here is this thing called hyperobjects. What are they? Hyperobjects are the type of are an object, if you will, something that has thingedness, but that's really, really, really large and hard to grab your hands around. So for instance, again, this is a horrible paraphrase, but just to give us some way to go about it, it would be like, what's the weight of every single cloud right now on Earth? Or what would be, like what would be the amount of carbon dioxide, emitted by every single car running over the last 14 minutes, something along these lines. Or we might talk about something like climate change as a type of hyperobject. The whole entirety of everything that is climate change as having a thingedness, something that you can't really wrap your heads around, but you can create a type of label that allows you to kind of point at this system that has all these tendrils. Anyway, for me, I think that that's a really great model for thinking about some of the enormous data sets that are being involved and invested in when we think about the global system that is artificial intelligence as a product, the way that minerals are being extracted, the way that images and texts and behaviors and our kinetics and our GPS locations are all being extracted, sometimes very ambiently, into this hyperobject that is the system called artificial intelligence that you are all of us, and not just you, but me too, we're all entangled within. We're all using it and being used by it simultaneously. So I'm just trying to notice it as part of an environmental structure that therefore I'm allowed to make artwork with and about because I am part of it. It's not so much about being complicit or not complicit. It's like, I am here in this room with you and artificial intelligence is inside me the same way it's inside of all of us. But that's maybe my own problem. I don't know. We'll see. Multimodality. Last little thought before I zip it on. Multimodality is more of a deep cut in terms of my own practice. I appreciate when Heather was introducing, she rattled off all these different things I do, installation, performance, this, that, the other thing. I think the detail I want to bring out is that a lot of what it means to me to be a hybrid media artist is that I work in a multimodal form. And what I mean by that very specifically is that a project or an idea might take form as a print and a book and a video, a single idea. It's not that there's a hierarchy for me where like, well, the book led to the this, the that, and then the ultimate outcome was the video. It's more like there's a concept is kind of like a gravity well. It has a center around which a satellite of different ideas and objects and outcomes all sort of orbit. And they all have a relevance. Maybe all of them are imperfectly dealing with this concept, and that together, this cloud, this multimodal realm of outcomes, all together are the artwork. Again, kind of like an atlas. You think of an atlas, it doesn't perfectly describe the terrain at all, but it does a good job of trying to help you triangulate within a set of concepts that we theoretically agree to believe in. We made it through the first slide, folks. Congratulations. We really did. I'm really proud of us. Okay. So let's see how we're doing on time here. It might be good. It might be bad. How are we doing, Heather? We're doing great. Oh my God. We're going to land the ship on that. Okay. So with that in mind, we get to the second part here, which is to actually look at some work, because I think that can be really helpful. We thought about some ideas. I'm telling you my half-formed thoughts. And so I thought I'd go backwards. There's no time to show you every single thing that I've ever made because we just got, just throw stuff at me, and that'd be rude of me to do. So I thought what I'd do is I'd pick out 3 past projects that help me, I hope, illuminate and illustrate some of the ideas or the ways that my ideas kind of work themselves out. And so I'll start by talking about this project, but I'll do it in a really in my own way, which is up to me because I'm up here and you're listening, and I appreciate that. So this first project I'm going to talk about is called Visible from Space. This is a long form project, as many of my projects are. This project took place over about 10, 12 years. In certain ways, there's certain ideas I have about what might even happen in the future. But really, this project began with me making drawings in a sketchbook, not realizing all the places it would lead. And that was probably around 2007, 2008. And so, 12 years on of running different experiments and trying to learn about what I was doing leads us here. We're looking at, just so you know, I've tried to, you notice I have so much stuff to say. So I've tried to cut out as many videos of this thing. This is a video still. It's a video still from a performance that was a site specific performance on the border. That is, the mountain is in Mexico. We are at a Montessori school that closed down that was like right next to the border guard patrol. And that's me working with one of my sculptures up in the sky. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, which is to say, so this project, Visible from Space, began as a thought experiment, as many of my projects do. And the thought experiment goes something like this. What would it mean to create a drawing on Earth so big that you could see it if you were standing on the moon and looking back at the Earth? With the naked eye, no telescope, you're standing on the moon, you're looking back. What it would mean to do that? I thought, okay. So this is starting from a drawing. So I thought, okay, let me do a little math. What would that be? Turns out, in general, the width of the line that you'd have to draw with would have to be 60 miles wide. And so if you wanted to then like have a hairline, you'd have to draw with this 60-mile wide marker. I don't know. Perhaps marker. Marker came to mind. Bulldozer? I'm not sure. And so immediately on doing this, my very follow-up thought for myself was like, wow, that's a terrible idea. What did you just come up with there? How horrible is that? How horrible is that an idea? How improbable? How expensive might that be? Where would you do something like this? What ridiculous hubris is there in you to think that you should ever even dream up of doing a thing like that? So it's this improbable, intractable kind of idea. But yet I was hooked. I thought, you know what? What's amazing is that the thought experiment gives us access to the speculative. And so I thought, well, what if I really want to live in that space? What might I do? Well, it means I have to look at the text. What do I mean by visible from space? What is visible? What is space? Could that be the space of a book? Could it be the space of a print? Could it be the space of an installation out in the desert where you're, shooting rockets off and trying to, look down at installations? This project, I kept going back out to the deserts in the Great Basin region, everywhere from southern Arizona all the way up through Oregon and beyond, and kind of finding different artist residencies and different sites to work with, different people who would lend me time on their land and different space. And again, working with kites, like kites and rockets and balloons and you name it, any way to get aerial and to be thinking sometimes the art would become up in the air and sometimes the art would be on the ground and I'd be looking down at it. I was really trying to reframe these relationships between up and down. Here, what we're looking at, by the way, is one of my foam sculptures. So I was trying to, several years after I was working with all the kites and drones, drones came out. Off-the-shelf drones. And even though, for 5 years, I was doing this project before I had access to drones or even knew it was going to be a thing. And in many ways, 5 years in, I kind of had felt like I had run the experiments and I felt like the project had kind of come together in a certain way. Then as drones got revealed to us as a accessible industrial technology made or military technology made accessible, it seemed like, hey, I could run all these experiments again and see what happens. And so this is what I mean about working in a multimodal fashion where you have kind of a set of premises that lead to the work that you might make. And again, anyway, I'll pick up the pace here. I apologize. So what we're looking at here is also from the Visible from Space project. These are a series of prints. What we're looking at here, and I apologize, these are this one is about, it's not this big. It's maybe 3 foot by 3 foot in terms of its actual size. It's printed on die bond, which is a type of aluminum. It's been routed out, so the actual edge actually has that irregular shape. The thing I want to point out is this little mark that you see up in the corner. There's a rock, and then next to it's kind of this black and white marking flag is what it's called. This is actually, so I started working with all these tools that get used in aerial cartography. The actual size of it might be helpful to know it's 4 foot by 4 foot. And so for a number of years, I was going out into the desert. So you start to see some of them and you start to get a sense of some of the scale of some of these drawings and what it might mean physically to kind of find these sites. I was starting to work with drones in a lot of these where I was shooting drones, shooting video, taking zillions of frames from the video, feeding that to a type of stitching software to try and make panoramas, but it specifically was trying to make them for a planetarium. So I was giving it the wrong information. It had in its head a model of a type of geometry that doesn't match up with the shape of the things that I was giving it. So there's kind of a tension, a push and pull between the types of spaces that I was purporting to tell the computer about. These are also, here you can see a different type of marking flag. Those little lines are about 1.5 feet wide, but their width is about 12 foot long, just to get a sense. And these are also used in different types of military reconnaissance operations. They're also used to give messages to people in planes back down. All these aerial marking flags. Anyway, this all led to a show at the Cultural Center, which is another one of these experiments. The thing I'll just say about this visible from space, this is at the Sidney Yates Gallery. There's a lot to say about the gallery itself because it was the main reading room for the library, City of Chicago, when it was the main library. This particular piece, when I was in conversations with the folks at the Cultural Center and they knew about my project and we were trying to figure out what would we do? How would we bring it here? One way would have been just like, hey, let's take all these experiments, all these videos, bring them in. And I thought, yeah, but all these things that I'm doing out in the desert, the thing that people don't get to access to is the fact that there's these site-specific performances that I'm doing where I'm flying drones around and there's these activities. There might be one person, there might be just me, there might be a handful of people. And so I wanted to create at the Cultural Center a way for the experiment to be produced live in front of people. And so for this show, what I did, and I think the next slide will help. Yes, no, this one. So what I did was I produced a set of about 1,000, about 1,500 of these foam, all my lines. So all these dashed lines are literally my lines from that original drawing turned into physical objects that I can then move around the space. I was in the gallery 40 hours a week for 3 months. And so what I would do is every day I would set up a different drawing on my little artificial desert. And then I had my blimp that I learned how to fly, which we could talk all about. Got it from somebody who sells them to hockey teams and the military, which was a lot of fun. That was a great conversation. You meet the most interesting people as an artist. I really have to say it's the best way to go. And so I started to do these experiments where on the blimp is a camera that can look down and you can see that I'm projecting a view from whatever the blimp sees. So I was able to reveal in real time some of this visible from space-edness. Are we at 640? Where are we at? I don't know, because we might skip. We're going to skip the video. I'm so sorry. I apologize. I like the sound. Well, you know what? Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll just listen a little bit because I say we're not going to listen, but then we'll just watch a tiny little bit. This is from part of the performance. That gives you some context for what that piece happened to look like as a live event constantly happening. All the videos are online. If you're want to see more of this, I could talk all about. This was described as a hybrid dirigible telepresent opera by a friend because they kept. I know. I was like, oh yeah, I'm stealing that. That's coming to my thank you review. And so, yeah. But let's keep talking. That one I talked a lot about. This next one I'll talk a lot about too. Let's keep going. So. A different project that I had been working on, this project called Century of Progress/Sleep, which, so you're working on these things. And I thought, it would be interesting. Maybe I should write an opera and star in it. So this project is an opera. It's a 45-minute long opera. Had no real singing background. So I took singing lessons for 3 years. Because I had been writing these poems that were a reflection on some curiosities I had. This opera, sometimes, I don't know if you come across that Carl Sagan book, the one about the demon haunted. Yeah, you've heard that one. So this is a demon haunted opera. Anyway, and so, or as I like to say, sometimes half jokingly, bad poetry sung badly. No, who knows? Anyway, so here, this was as part of, I had been working on this show as a solo performance. I do a bunch of nerdy programming. So I had all this one-man band kind of thing where it was like a laptop with Ableton Live, if you know what that is, and then running Touch Designer to do all these crazy live visuals behind it. And I could be singing and I could have foot pedals and do all this kind of stuff. And this particular opera, Century of Progress Sleep /Sleep, really deals with what I would say, this is 2015 through, we'll see. I've oftentimes talked about it as through 2034. So we'll talk about that too. But this particular opera It started as a solo piece. And then a few years into working on this project, Colgate University invited me out for a year-long visiting artist residency. And they said, we saw what we were doing at the Blimp. What are you working on lately? Could we do something? Well, I've done a lot of art and technology and science kind of collaborations. And I said, well, what would be really interesting, because I know you have a planetarium dome, it'd be really great to try and stage. So this is staged in a planetarium dome. And I got a chance to work with and collaborate in a bunch of different ways. This led to a whole line of thinking that I like to talk about as ensemble thinking. What does it mean to be in a collaborative space with multiple sentiences who aren't just me thinking to myself? And how can we make something together? How can I erase myself in a way to make room for others to make work with me around an idea that I feel compelled by? So with this particular project, I had done a lot of electronic music in Ableton and singing and whatnot. And I was able to, through Colgate, I was able to bring together an ensemble of musicians, and I could play a little part of my composition. And I'd say, do you want to play that? And they'd play it, and they'd play it differently than I had ever come up with, and much better, by the way. And I said, okay, we'll turn off what I did. And then I take another part and give it to someone else and keep turning off parts of the work. So my work ultimately was really scaffolding for me to create a type of flag to plant, to attract other people, to try and help me co-create the work together in this way. In fact, even here, what we're looking at is, it's really hard to document planetarium dome, FYI, just note to the future for yourself. That was its own issue. But I had even been working for the year, working with the planetarium dome staff, who typically work with physicists to teach about stars and, physics stuff. And I was like, well, hey, let's hack your system and take what it can do visually. And we'll then take the visual system that I've built. And we were doing real-time compositing of both the, physics science data, as well as some of the data that I was able to do with some of my work. Here we have some images of the band. They're really great to work with. The band, got to get the band back together. And it was really fun. Colgate had talked about, they said, what we'd really love is we'd love it if you had a publication. I said, okay, great. Let's do a studio recording and make a vinyl record. They're like, we're in. So this is the gatefold from the vinyl record. We got it. It was really a lot of fun. Even turned the libretto into an artist book where I can start to think about how those texts, because by the way, once you stage an opera in a planetarium, sometimes people say something that I think is a little backwards, but I feel for them, where you might say, oh, he did the planetarium dome opera. No, I did an opera. That's a very liquid form. It can pour into any space it's given with just about any budget. So here it takes the form of an artist book. Other places, this is at Spaces in Cleveland, which is an international invite-only residency, where I started to take the libretto and turn it into wall text, but turn the libretto into an installation that people could come to, even when I wasn't there. And of course, then I made friends with all these musicians in Cleveland, and I brought in the band from Colgate, and we started to do these pop-up sort of performances in the midst of the space, because a work doesn't just have to be one thing or have one shape. I'm interested in the protean ever becoming of what work can be. This one I'm hardly even going to talk about, but this was down at Southern Illinois University. Same piece. It just kind of flows into a new space. The reason I like to point this one out was I'm really not I have a lot of trouble with VR over the years. In my career, I think the VR has kind of gone through an up and down cycle, I think about 5 times in my career. And every time I'm like, oh, maybe I'll like it this time. And every time I'm like, it makes me sick to my stomach. Oh. But I made a VR piece that's part of this project where it's just fog. I've set off a fire alarm in so many buildings, you have no idea. I started thinking maybe I need to make some virtual fog to deal with. And so this person's walking around in my virtual cloud. Who knows? This is a thing you do. Okay, so let's keep going. I want to talk about another project. You can tell that I do a lot of work with research universities. A lot of times I've been brought in because of my interdisciplinary focus to kind of bring together people from arts and sciences. And so while I was doing the thing with Colgate, which is a fantastic opportunity, while I was working on Century of Progress /Sleep, University of Michigan reached out and they said, we'd like to do something with you. What are you working on lately? What would you like to do? And I said, oh, well, I just wrote this opera and I'd love to write the next act with you. And they're like, okay, tell us more. I said, but when I wrote the opera, I had been talking about this thing called Century of Progress /Sleep. And I know definitely personally what I mean poetically by Century of Progress. As an artist, I mean a 200-year period that goes from 1834 to 2034. Because for me, I don't have to have a 100-year century. I can do whatever I want. Anyway, I was really thinking about Alexander von Humboldt to Carl Sagan, which is its whole thing. We could dig in if anybody's interested in who they are. Sort of the quote unquote invention of nature or the conceptualization of it. Anyway, the second part of that story / sleep, I realized that I had completely used the word sleep very poetically. I personally, at the moment that University of Michigan ran, I was like, I know what I mean by sleep in this lyrical kind of sense, meaning the period of time after 2034. But we'll deal with that later, won't we? And so, because again, it's an opera about epistemological chaos, which you might notice every now and then if you look up. So when University of Michigan reached out, I said, I'd like to learn more about sleep. Perhaps you have some researchers who can help me do that. And they said, oh yeah, actually. And so I started working with the Michigan Medical Research Center, and we started doing, I started to become the site of the experiment doing these sleep research studies. I don't know if any of you have ever done this before. By the way, if you have, I know, right? Oh my goodness. And so they were like, you have to sign these forms. I'm like, no problem. It's for art. And so they wired me up. It's a very uncomfortable process, or at least I found it to be a bit claustrophobic. You're in this little room and you're trying to sleep. I thought I wasn't sleeping, but they tell me I was. And so as I'm sitting there, you can hear that there's a camera. Like you can hear the camera on a motor because there's somebody literally watching you all night and taking notes about your sleep. They are watching you do this while they record you. And in fact, one of the outcomes was data. And so they gave me gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes. This is what we're looking at here is polysomnography data, PSG data, which is what we talk about, in a type of format. This is a 5-minute excerpt from a 9-hour recording. And what we're looking at the top, you see the 2 top lines are my eyeballs, what they were doing over the 5-minute period. Then we've got 5 or 6 lines dealing with the brain. There's like left side, right side, and like 3 or 4 different spots. Then we have what my chin was up to. You can kind of see the EEG of the heart. You have 3 lines of breath taken from different places. You have left leg, right leg. So you can kind of see what this data looks like and how it plays out over time. And so I was spending time looking at this data and thinking about this data. Here, in fact, is a 30-second excerpt. Yes. And so, I'd be coming across and I'd look at something like this and I thought, what exactly happened here? Oh, great. And so, but what really started to attract me thinking musically about these is how we might notice something happens in the leg, and then something happens in the breath. You can see the heart a little, like, because the vertical lines help you kind of line stuff up. And then there's this period of like, and then the whole thing lets loose. I guess it's me that's letting loose. And then it seems to like settle down to this period. So for me, when I looked at this, I thought, oh, it's like the weather patterns of electricity moving through my body. It's almost like I am scoring the opera with my sleep. And this data is actually the score of it. And how could that become a starting point for things? As I was working on this, I would wake up in the morning, I'd have conversations with the technicians who had watched me sleep all night. And they said, it's just like the type of thing that happens when you're working on these projects, you have to talk to people. And one of the conversations was, they said, in the 60s, 70s and 80s, when they were learning how to do neurotechnological work, neurotechnicians didn't have to watch you on camera because they had these chart recorders with all the pens, and they would make these kind of sounds. And neurotechnicians had a sense of what state of sleep your body was in or the pathologies you might be going through just by the sounds that the pen would make. So they actually had this auditory musical knowledge. And in fact, when we moved from analog to digital capture in the mid 80s, some of the earliest digital capture had to sonify or recreate the sound of the pens because you had all this musical sonic expertise in all the people who had been trained for years. And I said, okay, that's awesome. This is the goal. This is why I'm here, is to find out these kind of lyrical moments that a scientist knows of that I can reflect on. And my thought was, I want to hear that too. And they said, well, you can't. These things are gone. And so the next slide is, of course, then I go out and buy one of these on eBay, like you do. And I made friends with a whole bunch of retired neurotechnicians down in Kansas City and kept going back down there and got them to get me all these old manuals. And then I fixed this thing so it wouldn't kill me. And that way I could use it in my studio. And then I started, doing what I said, like, let's run my data through it. Let's get that rolling. And then I started doing things where I would run through it like rice paper, and I would run through like different watercolor inks and thinking about like, how could this scientific instrument actually be the start of a new way of thinking about whatever it was I thought I was starting with. There's even parts where, I don't know if we'll watch a video, but like just it makes sound, it doesn't burn that. And it's kind of fun. Like the nerd in me is like, damn, got it working. The other part of me is like, I don't think I like what it sounds like. Which is okay. And in fact, I point that out specifically. You do the work not because it's going to turn into something. You do the work because the work is worth it. Process is all I have to say. Process is at the top. That's why I'm in this. Process is thinking. Thinking through making is why I am here. I learn the direction I'm going in by taking action. It's not so much that I know what I want to make. It's that I have premises and thought experiments, and I need to enact them with materials and performances. Just not. Oh no! Don't do that. Oh no! Seriously forward. Okay. This because this turned into a project called The Responsibility of Breath. All of this was occurring at the same time as the global pandemic. That seemed like a time when breath was everywhere. And so this notion of the responsibility of breath, it was only because of this work with the sleep research made me, and also, the pandemic, and also, the calamity that is the hope for social justice that we might achieve someday. And so there's this period of time when breath was everything, and I think we ought to notice it. And so for me, I wondered, what's the half-life of our breath? When is my breath not my own? And so this responsibility is weighing on me, and I hope everyone. And it finds its way into my work in ways that I can kind of try and grapple with that I may or may not make sense of, but it's what I try and do. These were little mini micro performances. This also turned into an 8-channel video installation that was shown in a whole bunch of places that we're not going to look at, so because we had time, because I really ought to get to the point. As I mentioned, I work with artificial intelligence. Oh my God, I'm going to land the plane on time. And so I'm really thrilled that we can talk a little bit, because I said there was 3 parts to this, right? There was the part where I talked a lot. We looked at one slide. Then we looked at 3 past projects, just so I hope you can get a sense of the way that I think about the problems that I pose to myself and what I might try and achieve in my studio. So now, finally, I want to talk a little bit about the project I've been working on, which is the Infinity de Bruno, or Bruno's Infinities. Unfortunately for me, it does help if you know who Giordano Bruno is. No? Okay. All right. So I'll go fast. Giordano Bruno, a 16th century Italian philosopher, and was burned at the stake. The reason for this is complex, but he was a polymath, figure ahead of their time. Absolutely. They had trained as a priest at one point in time in Naples earlier in their life. They were versed in something called the art of memory. One of the reasons they gained a lot of attention and of the Pope and like literally kings and queens all over Europe was because they had mastered something called memory, the notion of memory palaces, the idea of being able to create these giant imaginary worlds in their head to be able to remember enormous oratories and enormous amounts of information and facts, and other people wanted to learn this from them. There's some thought that Bruno had some interest in the idea that this artificial memory was also somehow tied to the cult, and there was some occult thinking about that this artificial memory might be powered by a type of magic. There's actually been quite a bit of writing about that. If anybody's interested in that, Frances Yates has a really important book that she wrote. But also, part of what gets you burned at the stake at this point in time would be he was looking at and promoting a lot of Copernicus's ideas. And one of the things that Bruno imagined was, well, maybe not only is the sun, the sun, at the center of our solar system, maybe the solar system isn't at the center of anything. Maybe, in fact, the universe is infinite, and maybe it's filled with infinite solar systems, and maybe those are filled with infinite planets, and those are filled with infinite intelligences. This idea of a pantheism and a polytheism, multi creation, these kinds of ideas, and some other bad decisions he made. Ran very afoul of the Venetian Inquisition and then the Roman Inquisition. He was put on trial for 7 or 8 years. Anyway, it's really important to know I'm fascinated by this actual real life figure, his philosophies, these kind of things. And I thought, as I started working with artificial intelligence, maybe what I want to work on is an opera, like it is, like you do. But in this case, I've been thinking about creating evidence of an opera, of a fake opera, of a fictional opera. So it's evidence of a fictional opera about fictional scenarios in the life of a real person, fictionally meeting artificial intelligences. Because I couldn't think of anyone better to meet and have conversations with artificial intelligences than someone like Giordano Bruno. Because it seems to me as though this was somebody already thinking about the fictive multiplicities that we might be surrounded by, yes or no, who knows? Maybe he knows that he was talking to them, maybe he doesn't sometimes. These first 2 images I'm going to show are 2 from an early version of DALL-E that you can't really use anymore. If you try and use that version of some of the generative software, you get a very different result. Companies change how these products output image. The point I'm showing these for is that these are really, really early days for me in the project. These are 2 examples of some of these scenographies that I was imagining. These fictional scenographies from a fictional opera. Again, evidence of something that maybe was staged. These first 2 are just 2 examples of tens of thousands of these generations where I was trying to think about and figure out what the visual language might be. And then I started taking all of that data, that corpus of information, and I started making things. So here what we're looking at is here's the shortest way to answer what this is. It's a collage. It's a print. This is a print on Zhuan. It's a Chinese paper. It's a very, very thin paper. It's a 20-gram paper. Oh my God, it's like almost paper. It is paper, but it's extremely thin is my point. It's very see-through. Actually, I've had a lot of trouble shooting it. I need to shoot more. But what we're looking at here then is mixtures where, as I was looking at the data being created, I would purposely go through and try and imagine what are the parts of this that this particular product has made a focal point in the image. And then I'd try and go through and delete anything that seemed to be the point of interest. Because again, that's my superpower as an artist. I can erase anything I want. And then out of the erasures, I would be left with components and breakages. I could then start to do things like take those bits and pieces into real-time virtual reality and 3-dimensional software. I use a thing called Touch Designer. I use other called Houdini. It doesn't matter. That's not the important part. The important part is that these then are created as scenographies in a virtual world that I then could take snapshots from and make prints of, because that's just how I do. It's not because that's an important way to work. It's just what's natural to me as a way to think through ideas. So I'm showing these 2 in particular, just so you can kind of see there's a type of 3-dimensionality for my ability to be able to move through these spaces. The longer I'd worked on this project, the more and more and more I chose to delete. And I felt that deleting was my creative act for a lot of these things. Like, again, if the artificial intelligences are great at filling space, I'm good at erasing it and making space for me. And also something else that's happening in these that I should mention is that it inspired me to start traveling to Italy and some of the places where Bruno actually lived. So a lot of these, actually, it's me replacing and using as scaffolding the things that I was half learning from artificial intelligence to actually go to sites where he lived and then be able to sample and photograph and scan and build out a deeper data set that's informed by a series of practices that are site very specific in some of these. And again, more and more we can do with less and less. And at a certain point, I'm hoping that there might be some handledness, some space that I'm feeling comfortable with. Some of these are also being created in Poland, where I'm then going back and forth to Italy and going back and forth to different places where he would have spent his life. I could nerd out for a while. This is doing things like feeding artificial intelligences paper, some of the paper that I've been working with that I really loved, and having it generate fake focked paper. Then you print out the fake focked paper on your real paper, start chopping it up with scissors. Maybe now you're making more of a pochoir style collage, maybe you then scan that back in. Like there's no necessary place where the work happens other than in the studio with my hands on it all the time, which is what I like to try and superpower my work with. This one also, I'm working with a whole bunch of simulation software because I got all into curtains and I could talk about that for too long. And then some of them, I'm working with, for instance, some of these are fabric samples from the palace of the family in Venice. That's the person who actually had him arrested. So he was arrested by the noble who actually hired a bunch of gondoliers to kidnap the guy and like bring him in and lock him down. It's like really fascinating stuff. So I'm like going to some of these places that are accessible to actually try and find some residue of what this life might have meant. Just so you know, and so these are all the prints, these main prints that I'm thinking about from this series, that again, I'm thinking about this group that we've been looking at as these fictional scenographies. Just to make a point of it, I also want to make sure you understand, ooh, show up. It would be great if something showed up there. Oh no. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This one might help us. I just want you to understand these are all actual moving. So all these things that I've been showing as prints also exist in these other forms where they're animated. Because I'm thinking through, like, are these prints also existing in the context of an actual opera that get performed? Do they exist in the context of, how do I put it? Like an installation project. I'm working on sound and these kinds of things at the same time. I work multiple simultaneous multi-modes to try and figure out what it might be. So these scenographies I'm having a lot of fun with. I'm really enjoying this notion of architectures becoming fabrics and fabrics becoming architectures and me becoming architectures and vice versa. So there's definitely some animated work that I hope that some of these point to without looking at too many of them. And then the very last thing I'll say, though I'm trying to decide how I'm feeling about this next group of works, which were many of the other things that I was doing in Poland, that I work with a lot of medical researchers. I've been working with my own MRI data. And I've been feeding my own MRI data to artificial intelligences to try and create these hybrids of my own body and Giordano Bruno, because I was trying to do some character work. So here we have some AI, MRI things going on. I'll just pop through these. I've been calling these my digital synthetic twins. Synthetic twins is actually a whole area. Some of the biggest areas in AI research actually is medical AI research, which we could talk a whole lot about. You think NVIDIA they have a yearly conference that I sometimes pop in on to try and check out what the latest developments are in terms of predictive analysis in the realm of medical imaging. And so this one actually, I had we recreated, these are all on paper, but this one actually did a 3-color litho of that I'm really kind of thrilled about. So I might do more of them that way. I'm still deciding. It's like an active process. And then here's some more. When I look at these, it's hard for me, just I'll point this out. It's hard for me, and you wouldn't know, but it's hard for me to not notice that, like, that's my collarbone that I see in all of these. Right. So I see my actual bone structure in these things because I'm, again, working with actual 3-dimensional MRI data that's then kind of helping me think through some of these thoughts. Anyway, I'm not sure. That's a lot of stuff. You've been very, very kind. Thank you.